Hey, I just wanted to speak briefly about my trip to Monticello. So I had planned to hang out with my friend Marci on the weekend of the 19th, and at the time we just had randomly chosen that day, um, and then we had decided to go to Monticello. And the reason was we decided to go to Monticello is because I had posted on my Facebook page. Um, just something I'd learned about, Monticello and Jefferson. So Jefferson is one of the founding fathers of America, and he owned Monticello, which was a plantation, and he had multiple slaves through an extended period of his life. And what I had posted was that Jefferson had had sex and likely raped one of his slaves, Sally Hemings. And through the years, she had children. She had four children with him. And those descendants have grown up in America and learned about sort of how they left to different states and how they were forced to leave Virginia. And I'm getting that all wrong. I'm not an expert on that. But I was intrigued by how a descendant of Jefferson on the white side had really embraced the descendants of the African American side. And, in this time and day, had invited them to join one of the reunions. And I think this was in the early 2000s. I learned on the Monticello tour that through DNA in 1998, it was confirmed that it was Jefferson who had fathered these children and that had spawned these descendants. And it wasn't actually admitted until 2000 at the Monticello, um, at the plantation where they do tours. And even then, it was just sort of briefly brought in. So basically, this Lucian Truscott I had posted was about him bringing one of his cousins, or multiple, but this one picture in particular was of Shannon Lanier, and he was on the African side of the Jefferson family. And how they have forged a relationship, and how bringing the African descendants to this reunion had really caused a rift and actually completely outed the white descendants who wanted to embrace the black descendants of Jefferson in, and how he's just talking about how this is not great, not right. And also, you can't erase the history that has been made. And by denying it and not, appreciating it is really, it's going to do us all harm. And so, anyways, my friend Marci and I was like, hey, let's go to, Monticello. It was a very hot weekend. But I was excited to see her because I hadn't seen my friend Marci in like maybe 1 year before COVID. So, likely 2.5 years at this point. And we had just happened to agree to meet on this weekend. And it turned out to be Juneteenth, which was, yeah, it's a federal holiday now, and it commemorates the emancipation of slaves. And I believe it was like a couple years, like this was the date when the last slaves in Texas learned about being emancipated. So it had already been a couple years in law at that point. Um, so the reason why I'm bringing this up is because, like, I'm interested, I'm learning, I don't know really what's going on. I'm very, uh, I'm very impassioned to learn about just, I really want justice for all. And, it bothers me that people are so uh, really, I don't know. I've dealt with racism personally, so it's a really personal thing for me. And living in the States, I see a lot of injustice with African Americans, all my black friends, and pretty much, not pretty much. I mean, anytime that my friends have told me stories about what has happened to them in the years of, of living here, it's just horrifying. It's just horrifying, and it just bothers me, and I feel like I'm going to cry right now. But I'm very much, I want to know. I want to know the history. I have also used the lens of African Americans in particular because of, learning about, especially like during the Harlem Renaissance and the different authors who wrote about passing. And I believe in a lot of ways I have, as a Indian descendant from India, which is my father, and then being First Nations Native American, which is my mother, I have used my last name, and I've used sort of maybe some of the features of myself as Indian from India to pass, so that I'm not really tied to being, First Nations, which is very hard for me to admit. And so I am very much drawn to learning about like the parallels and also how people rise. I like, I want to help people get out of these situations. Anyways, I digress. I was very interested in going because I wanted to see my friend Marci, but as soon as we got onto the plantation and we were doing the Sally Hemings portion of the tour, I realized that it might be triggering for my friend. Now, my friend is from Trinidad, and not to say that that's going to change anything. She has two children that were born and raised, and that are born and raised here in America, and so she's part of the struggle. She's also one of the most inspiring and forgiving people I've ever met in my life, and she totally makes me feel like just she helps me learn to let it go. She reminds me to let all of this go, which is hard, which is hard because I have a hard time, letting go of the injustices in the world. Anyways, I realized as we were learning there, so we were on a tour of the Sally Hemings, the 3 o'clock, and you're with this person for 1 hour and you're sort of walking along a little bit. You stop just a couple times, and you see the plantation in front of you. It's on a slope down, and she's telling some really hard stuff. It's a white woman, and I didn't really know what to expect. I all of a sudden felt really stressed for my friend. I let it settle. I rubbed her back. I stretched my back because we drove. It was a longer drive than I thought it was going to be. And just sort of taking it all in, watching people and sort of seeing their reaction. It was mainly white people. I think if there were 30 or 35 of us with this particular group, there was Marci and then a couple of other Black people. There was me and a couple of other Asian people, and then the 30 other white people. And I want to see how people react. I'm not staring at people, but I want to sort of see how they're taking this information in, and also learning and listening. Now, I was more keen on watching what people were doing and seeing how Marci was doing, and also just feeling really a little hot and wishing I had brought a water with me. But I was also like, less thinking about what was being said, like in everything, and just more of like the reaction of the people. I did find that it was as the tour guide had given us information about what had happened, and she was very empathic, and I can tell that it was sharing this with other people that are Black must be difficult. And this is just the lens I'm looking at. I'm always constantly thinking about how the other person is feeling, and also just the whole group as a whole. And knowing this information about Shannon Lanier and Lucian Truscott, I held it. I listened. There were a couple times where people were speaking, and I knew that we still had another portion of the tour. So it was like half an hour on this one part, and then we walked down and we went to this other part, sitting around. We're a little more under shade, and again, we're talking about sort of the history, and then we're going towards when the children that were descendants, when they were going to be free. I think that they were promised that the children that Jefferson had with Sally Hemings, these children were going to be free, but I don't think in the end they were. I think there's a lot of misinformation, or there's a lot of things that I didn't really understand. Um, but it was interesting that they were saying that Martha, which was Jefferson's wife, was, I think she said something about how she was very pleasant to Sally Hemings. We know that she wasn't, friendly if to Sally Hemings. And in fact, um, if a slave owner had slept with their slave and the wife or the partner or whomever found out about it, or even if there was no sleeping, I mean, they would mark any beautiful black woman, scratch their face, just totally maim them so that they weren't. And this was very typical in plantations, and also just in slave owners' wives, or anybody who felt insecure about beautiful black women. And so we knew when she was saying that, I was like, I don't think so. I don't. So, anyways, let that be. Everything was settling. We were about to finish the tour. I hadn't said anything yet at this point. I thought I wanted to wait until everything had landed, but I knew I needed to say something, and I needed to bring up Truscott. Lucian Truscott, the white descendant of Jefferson, and also his relationship and trying to bridge the gap to the African descendants of Jefferson via Sally Hemings and all of his descendants beyond until now. And so I, put up my hand, and I was like, I brought up Lucian Truscott. She immediately, as soon as I started to say Lucian, she understood where I was going to go with this. And I went in with just sort of real curiosity. And, I wanted to know, like, how was that being incorporated into the conversation, into the tours? So I basically just asked, like, what is happening with Lucian Truscott and him introducing, the Sally Hemings portion of the family. Basically, Lucian Truscott in 2002, 2 years after they started talking about Sally Hemings as being, being a partner and having 4 children with Jefferson, um, and Lucian bringing, Shannon Lanier, which is a descendant of Sally Hemings, to one of the reunions. I don't know how many descendants came with him of Sally Hemings, but a few, and they were not welcome at all. And in fact, I think they took a vote where, I guess, if there were about 200 on the white side, and 200, the people who had any say, so the 200 white descendants of Jefferson, that were voting to invite this Hemings family, or that portion of the family, in. 6 out of 200, which was Lucian Truscott's family, were the ones that wanted them to come in. So his immediate family, his siblings, were the ones that said, hey, yeah, no, these people are our family. And they have been denied, and I think now they have been completely sort of pushed out of the family. And the reason why, as I brought this up, that Lucian Truscott had wanted to bring this family in, she did agree that, it did happen, and that, in fact, that Monticello, where she was giving us a tour, was actually the foundation, and that the Monticello Organization was actually the family, and the family only owns now where the graveyard is, which is on Monticello. So when you get a tour, you'll be able to see as you leave where the graveyard is. And she said that that family had, the vote was to let the Sally Hemings family and descendants have their grave there. And they said that they are not allowed to have their grave there, which, I mean, I guess it made sense. It's not fair. It's not right. And, she had a lot of compassion and empathy for that portion of the story, yet it wasn't brought up, which was really interesting at all. And so there was a little bit of back and forth, and my friend Marci wanted to know whether or not, like, how that all was happening, because we were a little confused. It was like, I had no idea that there was a Monticello Foundation and then an organization, and they were two separate entities. That is not complete, that is not finished, but I thought it was very interesting. So then we hung out a little bit afterwards. We toured a little bit. We sat down. We had a drink. It was hot out, and then we wanted to figure out where the graveyard was. So we're on our way out. We cooled off, and then we were heading back. And so we head over to, or we asked someone. We said, it was starting to close. It was closing at around 6 o'clock. And I said, we waved someone over. We talked to one of the older white guys who worked there in some capacity, don't really know. But we said, hey, can you let us know where the graveyard is? And he pointed it out. And then so my friend Marci asked him, and I'm really happy she did. She asked about whether or not, why the descendants were not, of Sally Hemings, not able to be buried there. And I thought it was really smart, actually, in retrospect, because he said that the black descendants of Jefferson have refused, or had refused, to be buried there. And someone is lying. And I haven't really dug into it, so I'm just really I've been a little busy, so I haven't been able to make this video, but I've been really curious at, where is the truth? Why is it so hard to see that, your family is your family, and embrace the descendants? This happened. There's no changing this history now. You are making more of an ass of yourself by denying people, the right to be buried with their other descendants. Now, to be honest, I guess, I don't know. I would assume that, yeah, fuck you. I don't want to be buried there. But at the same time, it's if you have any kind of idea on how important it is for posterity to embrace and then allow bodies to be buried together because you're part of the same family. I got really exhausted towards the end. So we went down, we looked at it. I didn't really care for that anymore because I was sort of done with all of that. But towards the end of the tour, when the tour guide, the woman, was talking about how they started to give portions of the land, or they made promises to some of the black descendants to give some of the land to them at a certain age or some point. And I just rolled my eyes within myself. If you know Tina Fey, she does a really good eye roll, whatever. But it's don't even get me started on land ownership. Being a Native American and First Nations, and not I am First Nations. I can't even. People telling people that they don't belong here. It's really thick to hear that, and or rather rich. And yeah, I just wanted to share my time on going to Monticello. I'm happy I went with Marci. There's no other person that I would have wanted to have gone there with. And it was a nice day for her and I, to spend together, because we did study African American studies, and we have a lot of history together. And I'm so grateful for that experience, to have learned so much with Marci through the years, and then to have had that really profound experience at Monticello. I would encourage you to learn more about the history of America, and before America was America. And I'm really hoping in my own learning of myself, and in Canadian history, and all that's happening right now with all the residential schools and the children that are being uncovered. My grandmother was taken in Western Ontario from her home and put into a residential school, and she suffered a lot, and she was in turmoil. She was tortured. and it was hard to watch. I didn't understand really what was going on with her. She just looked like she was in pain. Um, and I'll talk about her on another day. But thank you so much for listening to this. And please take care of yourself and really take ownership of learning history wherever you are. And know that there are multiple sides. All right, thank you.